Hey guys, Space Marine 658 here. Today we're going to be talking about optimizing your UI using material animations. So let's kind of dive into that and what I mean by that. So let's go ahead and take a look first at my actual animations in game. So you can see I have one up here, but then if I also jump into the game itself, I can show you one as well. As you can see, slow down a little bit. These are two completely different animations. One is an arrow going from one side to the other of a docking port animation, and the other one is a rotating logo. And these are just two simple examples. You can get pretty complicated with it. Just depends on what you want to do and how you want to do it. So if we go ahead and take a look here, what we've gone ahead and done is create a master material. This is sort of our UI master animation material. Now, of course, by Epic's own word themselves, creating material instances don't necessarily save performance. It might save like a little bit here or there, but for the most part, it's a workflow saving thing. But what does save you performance is using materials inside of your UI instead of using UMG animations. The reason for that is when you have a UMG animation, it invalidates a lot of the structure around it, and it basically forces it to re-render those over and over and over. And so because of that, if you have an animation playing in those, every frame that it's playing, essentially it's affecting the entirety of your UI, especially the part that it's actually invalidating and forcing to update. But it could have effects as far up the chain as the entire actual widget itself, just depending on how your structure is laid out. With that, we're going to kind of cover this because this is something that could outright replace that. So let's actually take a look at what I've done here. So at its most core, basically I have switchers. These are basically two material switches that take in a parameter, which is just, as you can see here, I've got a description. 0 is a panning animation, 1 is a rotating animation. You can have as many of these as you want. Right now I just have the two, just to show you the example. And then inside of here, I'm going to show you here in a second, this is a material function. Material functions are important because they are basically how you can do some really cool advanced stuff. You basically can take material functions and use them in a lot of different ways depending on what exactly you're wanting to do. Here I just have them as two switches. One is the actual final color and one is the opacity mask. If I needed a screen position one as well, I could also do that. And then you can see here I have these weirdly colored nodes here, which actually I need to correct. This one should be colored the same as this one, but let me actually grab this one and do that right here. But essentially what these are reroute named nodes. So if you want to basically do the same thing here for yourself, what you want to do is you want to drag a pin off and type in, actually easier way, we type in named nodes. What you can do is add a named reroute declaration node. What this says to the material is, hey, if you go into here, you need to go to wherever we have that rerouted node endpoint to. So as you can see here, we have alpha 1 right here, and alpha 1 is being plugged in from the alpha here of the animation 1. Now, of course, this is basically how I'm passing these variable around in a more clean way than having a whole bunch of lines dragging across everywhere. So each animation is kind of broken up into their own separate thing. As you can see here, this is an animation, this is an animation, and then over here we're actually combining them. So let's talk about how we're actually combining them. Before we get into the materials animations themselves, let's talk about how we're actually combining them. So what we're doing here is using a material function called a multi-switch. And what this does is basically you right click and you can type in input and you'll get a function input. And then from here, I've gone ahead and selected a vector 3 for this one. You could, in theory, make a multi-switch that uses different ones. Vector 3 is the most useful, though, because it covers the most cases for what I need it for. But you have options from scalar, vector 2, 3, 4, texture 2D, cube, 2D array, texture, static bool, all kinds of stuff, right? And so basically what I've done is, let me just remove that, is you have a switch parameter. So this is the parameter that you're going to pass in that is the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what we're doing here is we're comparing it with a hard-coded value. So this hard-coded value is 0 and 1, and you'll need one for each and every single option that you provide. with the exception of your last option. Your last option you don't need it for, because by default, if you've not selected anything, your last option will be the one that gets selected. So as an example here, if we pass in a 0 to our switch parameter, we're going into this if statement and saying A is 0. And then we're saying B is 0. And so then we go, okay, if 0 is greater than 0, which isn't true, so we ignore that. If 0 is equal to 0, okay, then we're going to take this input 0, which is our first of our input of our actual animations. Then we're going to pass this on to the next if. And basically what you want to do is you want to continue to pass them along so long as they are, true. If they become false, so for example here, let's say 0 is the one we passed in, right? So it would return true and it would turn this input 0 because this is true. So it would return A is equal to B. And so it would actually return this item right here. And so in the next one, it goes, okay, is A greater than or equal to B? We go, well, no, it's neither greater than, or it is greater than, 0, which is what we passed in here, is not greater than or equal to 1, it's less than. So it's going to take the less than, which is from the previous if. If it's equal to or less than, you want to take the previous if. If it's greater than, you want to take the next item in the inputs that you're passing in. And you want to keep doing this exact same way. So basically you want to keep copy and pasting the second one over and over and over while incrementing this each time. And basically what happens is, so if you pass in 0, it gets the 0 on the first node and carries that all the way through to the end. If you get a 1 here, it's going to go, oh, it's A is greater than B, so we're going to grab 1 and we're going to pass it to the next one. And goes, okay, if 1 is equal to 1, then we're going to keep it from the previous, so we're going to keep carrying that 1 through. But if you pass in 2, it's going to come in and go, okay, 2 is what you passed in, therefore we're going to grab this one instead. So here it's going to go, okay, it's greater than, so we're going to initially grab this one, go on to the next one. Oh, actually this is the one we want, grab it, and then keep going. Now this is all just a multi-switch, right? So this is it's a little bit complicated because you got to keep adding on to it. But the benefit is that in your master material, now you have a switch that can switch between all the different animations and their alphas with relative ease. So as you can see here, so let's actually take a look at, some animations to kind of get an example of what this actually means. So you got material animation 0 and an alpha of 0. These are being returned from our first animation, and these are what we're going to show if on our instance we have a 0. And so as you can see, let me actually show this as well. So to get this material function, right? So let's say you've created this material function, you've been following along. To actually get that, you just want to right click and type in material function, and you'll get material function call. You click on that, and then you actually are going to select that material function. So in the example, let's say you did the switch, you're following along, you just click on that, and that then gives you your option. So let's take a look at our animation 0 here. So this is a relatively simple one. I've parameterized a lot of these, but we've also got parameters for other animations, so they don't always all overlap. And depending on, you could do a little bit more advanced stuff to hide some of the options or categorize them. Personally, I've kind of left them by default, but I'll show you how to do that if you want to actually categorize them into different sections. So first, we're going to have a look here. So we have a static image, and we're adding that and passing in that static image to both the material animation and the alpha. That is because this static image, the final result here, this add, is combining an alpha with a RGB. Therefore, it's going to be a vector 4 by default. And so therefore, we're not too worried about it because we can grab the alpha straight from here. But if we come down here, what we're adding to it is a lerp. And this lerp is going between a 0, 0, 0. So basically a black constant and a moving image. Now that moving image, we're describing the RGB from, and then we're doing some stuff to it here, as you can see, to make it spin as well as to shrink it down just a little bit. We'll talk about that in a second. And then down here below, for the actual alpha, for what we actually alpha this lerp with, we're using these alpha clamps. Now, for this one, we're not actually doing anything. There's no actual texture in here other than these docking bars. But what these docking bars do is they have a alpha in the middle, and then black to the left and black to the right. Now this looks a little confusing because the image here for the moving image isn't the actual correct one. This is for the rotating animation. If we go to 0, basically it gives these black bars behind here, basically allowing it to know where the actual alpha is to separate these two images. Because what's happening is we're overlaying two different images on top of each other, a moving image and a static image. Now, you could have them overlap and be fine with that. And if that's the case, you can just leave the alpha clamps as like a blank one here with complete alpha. But what I've essentially done is split these into two separate images, so that way it looks a little bit cleaner when the animation's actually playing. So if we look here, this is the final animation. So the arrow doesn't overlap these little docking ports by sticking under it, because I want it to all be transparent in the final version, right? I want it to look clean by being completely transparent in the UI, other than these actual parts we're showing. And so what I'm doing here is I'm essentially clamping off all of this extra space so that the arrow doesn't overlap with the actual docking port image. And so then what we've done on this side is we've got a texture scale. This is just setting the scale of this specific texture. Now for this initial texture, the docking port one, it doesn't matter. But for example, for the second one, we may want to have a slightly different scale. So if we go and look at our main menu here, so let's say it's at 1, we may want to rescale it to like 0.5, 0.1. Just depends on what we want to do. But by giving it that option, we could do that to any of them. We could scale any of them. Now see, as you can see here, this is scaling the arrows themselves. So for this animation, it's not necessarily useful, but for the rotating one, it is. Now there are ways to sort of change that. If we wanted to scale by center, we could apply this to actually, just grab this part and you plug it in here. If we go ahead and save that and take a look here, and then if we go 0.5, you'll see you kind of get some weird effects going on, just depending on how you have your UV set up. So for this one, I only really care about texture scaling UV for the actual arrows themselves. So if I want to show multiple arrows, I could. But yeah, down below we have our time that we're passing into our painter, and then we have a painter X and painter Y speed. This one is important for anything that is doing a left to right motion. So for example, in this version, we got our painter X and painter Y. So we can say -4, make it even faster, -1, make it slower, we can make it 0, make it static. Just depends on what we're actually wanting to do. But as an example here, we have this rotational speed. This one only matters for this rotational one here. So we could actually go in here and speed this one up, or slow it back down. But as you can see here, that's kind of, in-depth talk about the specific materials here. But as you kind of get an idea of, you can have quite a large variety of animations. So as an example, this one's a little bit different. And what you can then do is, so you got your animations, you got them all in this master animation, right? So for each one of these, then you've got all these different options here. But let's say some of these, you're less worried about for certain animations, and you kind of want to clean it up, make it look a little neater. What you can do is you can come in here, and as an example, we can give it a group. So we'll say this is just for the rotation, because even though I'm applying it here to the non-rotational one, I still want to have it available, but I just want to be aware that by default this is for the actual rotational animation. And then this rotational speed is definitely for the rotational one. And then the moving image is for both. Yep. So those are all for both. And then the panner, this one is only for the panning animation. So we'll type in panning. We'll give it another one here. We'll go ahead and save those and refresh that. As you can see here, if we come back, now it's actually starting to separate those out. So you still have your parameter values here. So like the UI animation, this is for the specific one that you're wanting to select. So if you go ahead and select 1 versus 0, well, I guess a better example would be if we come over here. And you see here, but we've got these different images. Now, I set these up to be parameters, so that way I can swap them out and reuse this single instance for a couple of different things, or create multiple instances for different things. So you can see I have two different instances of that same master material. They're using two different animations and they have two different icons here. But in theory, I could combine them or use them in different ways. There's a lot of different ways you can use this. But yeah, as you can see here, we've got these split out. So now that if I'm looking at, oh, this is a rotational one, so I actually care about this rotational speed and things like that, versus if it's a painting one, I care about this. And you can split it out further and make more categories depending on what you actually want to do. But that's the basics of the material setup, the actual material here. So let's actually go take a look at how it looks in the UI and how we can use this to do different things. So as an example here, this is my main menu. I ignore how crazy big this is. There's a lot of changes that are coming to this. This is one of the earliest ones that I did. So it is kind of chaotic here. But as you can see, right now it's just a slow rotating animation. And it's just using that material instance. And all I've done is I've just taken an image, dragged it in, and set it as that material instance. It's as easy as that. If you want to use this as a variable, it does require a little more setup. So let's actually go take a look at what that looks like. So here I have a docking text widget. And basically what this is this takes in a few different things, some tags. And basically what I do is I take a look at these tags and I go, okay, when I'm in range of docking, I want this image to appear. When I'm actually docked, I want this image to appear. But when I'm in the progress of docking, here's what I actually want to show. Now for this actual texture, if we go and take a look at this, if you want to display a image as an actual texture, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is just set a brush from material, and then your texture here is just whatever variable type you want to use. Now you do have to make sure you're using the right one. So for example here, for all of the other prepared, active, and all that, they're just using a simple texture 2D because they're not animated in any way. But for the in progress one, because it is animated and it's using that material instance, it needs to be a material instance. Now using a base level material, you just make that a material. But I'm using material instance just so I can plug in my cool new tool I just made. So if we go ahead and take a look here. So now what happens is when my UI element here, basically what it'll do is it'll update to show this material instance. But every time this is playing, every frame this is playing, it's not changing the UI. The UI is not updating, it's not changing. It only changes the one single time that that call is made, even though that animation is playing. Versus if you have an actual animation playing, if you had like a animation you made down here in the UMG editor, that's going to be updating and changing this UI every single frame that that animation is active. And that's not necessarily what you want. But yeah, so that is the basics of using material elements for your UI. If you have any questions, leave them down below. But otherwise, good luck and good hunting.